Hi, gang. Donna here. Today I am sitting down with Adam Best. Adam Best is a military veteran who he was in the Navy, and he was an officer who was in charge of several different people, and he used to decide where they were going to travel at times. But more importantly, his experience as a vet led him to create a podcast called Veterans in the Wild as a way of giving back. But the better two moment that we're going to discuss today is what led him to the military. And that, for a lot of people, happened after 9/11. So I'm sure that this was a decision that he had to think about his life, what he was giving up, what he was risking, and the adventure that may lay ahead. So today I'd like to welcome Adam Best, and I'd like to thank you for your service as well. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Let's start out with how, I hate to ask this, but how old were you when you did, after 9/11, that this became such a matter of urgency for you to join the military?
Well, so I did ROTC at Penn State, and the conditions of that is that they pay for school to get you through college, and then you owe them service because they paid for school. The decision point comes the start of sophomore year, so you can basically play for free with freshman year. You can do the whole thing and walk away scot-free, basically of having earned the 1 year of college for what you did. Literally the first day of school, on the first day, they slide the paper to you and go, time to decide. So it was the summer between freshman year and sophomore year that I really had that angst. I was 18 years old, and it was time to decide what I do with my life.
And is it a choice so how long after 9/11 was this?
So this was, I guess it was about a year later. So yeah, it was August of 2002.
Okay.
And so it was not only just like emotionally reacting to 9/11, it wasn't seeing, our country under attack. It was also what was happening next. Doing ROTC, if you weren't previously in the Navy, or if you weren't, you can be on active duty and do ROTC. The Navy has different programs to get enlisted sailors through school as well. But I didn't have any previous experience. I didn't know exactly what it was like, what the Navy was doing or the military was doing. But a year later, you see a lot more of what's happening, what has played out in the years since 9/11. And so that also adds to the fire of what am I going to be doing?
So why did you decide the Navy out of all the branches of the military?
My grandfather was in World War II, and he thinks he volunteered because he thought he was going to be drafted anyway. A pretty common reality in World War II. So he chose to go to the Navy so he could choose where he ended up. Like, he chose the Navy because he didn't want to go to the Army, or he wanted to stay where he wanted to go. So that was part of it. And then I grew up fishing on the water. Always loved boats, so it seemed like a very natural fit. And it seems kind of funny because everyone makes fun of it. Join the Navy, see the world, but they deliver on that promise really well. I got to go through a lot of Europe. I got to see the Middle East and discover some countries I didn't even know existed. So I got to see some places that I definitely had some forethoughts and thoughts weren't going to be impressive, and I was just blown away with their beauty.
When my father-in-law, he was in the Navy, and he kind of did the same thing. He joined the Navy because it was the safer of all the branches. And he talked about how, and I guess the reason why I'm asking this is I know that things are different now. Back then, he did the laundry, he ran, that was all in-house. There wasn't outside firms that did this stuff for you guys. Is that still very much the case, that you guys have to do this, or is there an outsourced group that comes in and does that stuff?
That's a great question. And that's something I think that also attracted me, was that, a ship, a submarine, plane out in the middle of the ocean really has to be self-sufficient. You can't, you don't send your laundry out in the middle of the ocean, because where are you going to send it to?
Right. Well,
so yeah, it is very much, the self-sufficiency that the Navy needs to have.
I just didn't know if they had like other people that they hired from a different organization. Maybe that's why I was asking the question. But
That certainly has the military's definitely gotten a lot more joint. It's the biggest word they're referring to it. So they're trying to see how Navy can help the Air Force integrate with a lot more. If the Army has a specialty, why should the Navy specialize in doing it as well? If we already have the Army doing it very well, don't waste the material or the resources.
right,
So
and that makes sense. That makes total sense.
absolutely.
So how long were you in the military?
5 years, 5.5 years.
And so you traveled, and you mentioned in your bio that you get to do a lot of fun things at a young age. So was that military wise, or just being a young man?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, the Navy does give you the opportunity, the military gives you the opportunity that if you join right out of high school, if you join right out of college like I did, you're given the opportunity to, you're steering $1 million ship, $1 billion ship. You're making decisions that impact not just that ship or, what happens to that ship or its mission, but also on my first ship, there was just about 300 people who were relying on, that ship being safe around the clock or around a deployment. And so you're making those decisions at 18 years old, at 22 years old. And honestly, the first time that, for me, it was the first time I got to be, they call it the pilot house, or the bridge of the ship is where you make all the decisions to drive throughout the ocean. The first time you get to take the deck is the term, and you get to be the guy in charge of making those decisions, or the girl in charge of making those decisions. I honestly probably had all the information I needed. I had, where the ship was relative to other ships, and it was just sort of like, okay, I know I need to do this, but it's nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I was going to ask you. Somebody turns over this to you and goes, "Okay, it's your baby now."
Yep.
It's got to be nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and luckily it was my best friend was on the ship. He was in charge at the moment, and I was taking it from him, and I think he could even see it too. Like, he told me all the information, and it was sort of like, you have to take it, Adam. I can't. It's mine until you take it from me. So
yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely, I remember that vividly. It was 2 or 3 minutes of just, okay, I'll go.
I've had moments like that, not as intense and not with $1 million or multi-million-dollar ship, but yeah. My first foray into radio was kind of like that.
And I didn't even realize it, but us discussing it was the first better to moment of deciding to join the military led me to a better to moment of, you get to a point where, okay, I got to jump again. Now I have to take control of the ship. And it leads to just more and more moments that sort of spread out from the first one.
But isn't that how life works? We get to a certain plateau and we're like, okay, we've got this. We've figured it out. And then life goes, but wait, there's more. That was the whole theme of 2020, but wait, there's more. So, when you look at it, you've plateaued now, you've taken this next step. You're in charge. You're the man in charge. So then what happens? You get to this point where, this has to feel good that, yes, and I'm not saying it's all ego or bravado, because you still are looking at the safety of people in the ship, but there's got to be a little bit of your ego going, I'm the man.
After a while, you do get much more comfortable, and I fell in love with that whole process of driving the ships around. Ultimately, part of my decision to get out of the military was, you move on from driving the ships to then fighting the ships with its missiles and its capabilities, and the radars that are unparalleled and just can do amazing things. So you move on to different things, ultimately leading to commanding a ship, which would be amazing and an incredible opportunity. But I was truly, hey, I just want to drive ships for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
And that sort of didn't really align with what the Navy has for, you start here and then you move to this section, and then we're training you ultimately to command a ship by yourself. It just wasn't. I was like, no, I just want to stay here and play. I
get it.
This is my playground.
Well, it's your playground. If you're enjoying what you do, you don't want to have to move into all the, dare I say, and it's not necessarily political, but there's always office politics. So I'm sure
Yeah,
there's even politics in that. You don't want to necessarily deal with all that stress. I mean, isn't it better just to do something that you enjoy doing, you
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
and embrace it? So,
Yep.
so you're driving the ship. Obviously, you got moved around, and that was not necessarily something you were enjoying as much. So you just, tell us during this 5 years, what was your favorite place to travel to?
I was very fortunate to see many countries, but my favorite was Jerusalem.
Okay.
Um, I'm not very religious, but to see, I think it was the surprise of seeing the places I didn't think I wanted to see. Um, I probably would never, spend my dollars, or it's not on my bucket list to have gone to Jerusalem, but to have the chance to have gotten there, um, and to see how important it is for other people. Like anyone can go there and see, like, wow, this is really, you can feel the intensity of it. So I think that was really my most cherished place because I didn't think I wanted to see it.
During that 5 years, did you ever face an actual battle, or leading up to it, where there was the intense stress of we may not make it out of here?
Nothing terribly, nothing, nothing comparable to what many people face. The for one, ship was shot at, but it was shooting a rifle at a metal ship that
Yeah, you're like, come on.
in the moment it was intense because you don't expect it, and to see
Right.
it, it
Yeah.
is intense on that. And on the second deployment, we heard that another ship, same situation, small arms or small artillery shooting at a big ship. But it does keep it real to you that there is a threat out there. They don't like the United States in many places, and sometimes it's also a good reminder. Hey, we're here for a purpose. That you know, we're not just here playing with ships or having fun up on the bridge like we talked about a moment ago. Like we are doing a purpose.
Well, and that one bullet, I mean, one bullet could, you know, unfortunately hit somebody. There's always that possibility, even if you're on that big ship, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
and
you know,
unfortunately, we also saw what one small one small boat did to the USS Cole.
yeah. So, so you're in the military for 5 years, you've traveled the world, and what happens when you get out? Do you go back to school, or what did you do? I mean, you're suddenly now, you're no longer following, I dare I say, your passion, part of your passion. So now what do you do?
A lot of different things. It was at first sort of a big letdown, and it's sort of a change, and maybe what's ultimately leading to the podcast. Um, I think a lot of people, especially that join like right out of high school, you go from your world of you knew what your world was, and then suddenly you move into this new world where you're in the military, and suddenly the army sends you off, and you're over maybe in a war, um, or that's sort of all you know after the first life you cherish. So that's next, and then you get out, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm on to phase 3 of life. Um, and you've left a very structured system where you walk into a room, you know how you fit in. You can look around and say, okay, that's the most senior woman in the room, and I know where I fit. So you lose all that structure. You lose a lifestyle that you understood very well, very well, because every day they put it into you. I sort of had a feeling of kind of loss.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely go through some that was sort of your identity. I'm in the Navy. That's what I'm doing. You get out, and suddenly you don't have the biggest part of what I gained from the military was the people. Absolutely, the people far and away. Um, so I would say the sense of loss was the first issue I had to face was facing civilian life and sort of overcoming like, okay, I stepped out of that. Now what do I do? And it's sort of the how do veterans recreate themselves? Um, I actually I stayed working for the Navy for 5 more years, so that sort of maybe helped my transition.
Uh-huh.
It was sort of a very good, like it was still very familiar, just in a different role. I was using my engineering degree from college, so sort of different, but also still very familiar. Maybe I was sort of like a failure to launch, maybe.
Well, what you're describing though is something that a lot of people, whether they, I mean, I think it's more prevalent now, but a lot of people go through this loss. It's part of your identity, especially if you've made a career out of anything. If you've stayed at a job for 5, 10 years, that becomes your identity. You take on that role. When I was a claim supervisor, and I know it doesn't really sound the same, isn't the intensity, but that was my job. That was my identity. And when I walked away from that, all of a sudden it's like, well, who am I? And I was in my
Absolutely, yeah.
40s, and this is something that usually people, the older generation, experienced in their 60s. They experienced this in their 60s when they retired. It's like, okay, all of a sudden though, you're no longer that identity. And I think that's something that all of us need to try to figure out and work on. The younger generations definitely got a different take on it, but how do we identify ourselves? And it should, and I've had this talk with some other people about labels. We label ourselves and we try to fit ourselves into that niche that you're talking about. Where
Yep.
do I fit in? How many times do you walk into a room full of people and I'm sure, especially with your military background, you walk into this room, you may have known everybody in that room, but you feel completely alone.
Yes.
Especially after you got back, I'm sure that was a big thing at functions with your friends. Even though these people were your close friends at one point, is there still that camaraderie?
Yeah. I was in Norfolk, Virginia with the Navy. I stayed there for 15 more years before moving down here to Florida. So I sort of didn't go back home to Pittsburgh. I guess I didn't face that nearly as much. I sort of stayed with my connections with the Navy. I guess I really don't have a great answer for that one.
But do you, in your experience with your podcast and with dealing with other military people, have you noticed that some people, when they leave, they feel even more isolated because the support system that they had before they joined the military is completely different?
Yes, absolutely. I guess I'm not sure if you're asking about
I'm just
public
asking.
support or just.
I'm asking in general because it's one of those things where it's like, you guys, like a good way to say this, I guess, would be, it's really no different than somebody who decides at 18, 17, 16 that they're going to join a band,
Yeah.
a rock band.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are young. You
Yep.
see the adventure. In your case, you're looking at, okay, well, this will help with college, which I knew. I had several friends that joined the military because they wanted their college paid for. So
Yep.
I get that. But ultimately, you're making these life choices at such a young age. And then you go off on this adventure to come back home to a world that you guys don't necessarily know. And I know you, like you said, you didn't go back to Pittsburgh, but even the people, when you stayed in West Virginia, I mean, how long had you been in West Virginia prior to that, prior to you going off on the
Yeah.
boat and then coming back?
Yeah, you're right. And there is, even when you're in Norfolk, I mean, you're gone half the time too. So absolutely. Yeah, there is definitely, you do sort of have that challenge of making, what is your next life? What is your, what are the next, what do you want to do next? And I think maybe that's where the podcast is coming from, is I want to see what other veterans have done. The Navy does give you a lot of tools and then a lot of maybe unique skill sets. That's okay. What did you do with them from here? And then entrepreneurship's big with veterans because we don't like to be told what to do, so we're doing it on our own. So that's sort of where the podcast is going, is exploring, what's next after the military, and how did you solve the problem that I probably struggled with a lot of. How did you find your identity of next?
So how did you find your identity?
Well, There were many struggles, and it's been a long journey, honestly.
Did you, I mean, I know that some people in the military have some people, they have no problem getting into a relationship. I know some combat veterans that have had issues with their relationships, PTSD, night terrors, those things, and their partner can't deal with it. So, did you have a partner necessarily before you joined the military? Did you find your partner after the military? You know, did you make any I guess what I'm saying is, or asking is, did you make the connection? Did you have a connection when you went in, or did your connection and your relationships all formed after you got out?
I'm very lucky that my wife, her father was in the military, and she, for a career, so she grew up moving around with the military. Very understanding, very supportive of what that lifestyle brings. Um, I think my issues probably, I met her the year I got out of the, or the year before I got out of the military. So luckily she did understand what the military life was like, but I don't think she didn't see much of my experience in it, because we met, and it was new young romance, but I was also home for 4 days and then gone, and home for 3 days and gone. And it was great because, it's young and it's new, and hey, I only can see you for 3 days, so let's make it an amazing 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how long after you met did you end up marrying her?
We met in 2009 and got married in 2011, so pretty
That's not
quick.
bad. That's
Yeah,
well, I've seen quicker, but yeah, it's not bad. Um,
maybe not. Yeah, question of quick.
so did the relationship, how was it for you transitioning? So once you're not working with the Navy now, correct?
Correct.
So when you finally broke that bond, what pushed you to do it, and where did you find yourself at next?
I went from working from the Navy as a civilian into financial services and insurance. I ran a farmers insurance agency for 4 years. Um, as I said, veterans don't like to be told what to do, so um,
Mm-hmm.
starting my own business sounded like a great opportunity. Um, Ultimately, I sold that business because we were moving to Florida, and I could have. I learned a lot of lessons from owning a business for 4 years that I think, some of them are the pains of growing a business, but I also had a blast and have no regrets. So,
And insurance is not the easiest business to be in. I was on the other side of it, so I completely,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. When you said you're a claims adjuster, I said, "Ooh,
I started out in mail file reception, and then I moved my way from claims as an adjuster all the way up to claims supervisor for my unit. And
no,
my husband was always like, well, you could have that corner office. And it goes back to something you were saying about the commander. He's like, you can have that corner office. You can have your boss's job. And I'm like, I don't want my boss's job. I'm quite content where I'm at.
yep,
Don't want to move anymore. I'm quite happy. There
yep,
was enough BS where I was.
yep."
So then did you have kids?
I have two boys, two awesome boys. They're 6 and 3. Um, One is a baseball superstar, and one is just a daredevil who he sees it and he wants it, and he just goes right after it.
I have to ask, if as they get older, would you advise them to join the military?
I still would, yes. I always had the thought that, I think for me, I always had the concept that you can't criticize what's going on with the country without having done your part. And for a while, I had the thought that everyone should, like some countries have a mandatory 1 year in the military for all men. I don't think that's the correct route, but I feel like maybe the country may be better for one mandatory year. Your option could be the military, it could be Doctors Without Borders, it could be the Red Cross. But at least for me personally, I thought I think every life should have some sort of service component to it.
Makes sense. I
Yeah,
mean,
and truly, not everyone should join the military. It's not a fit for everyone because, you know, like you said, some people it's joining a band, some people it's joining the Navy.
Yeah, I mean, I know the two don't seem very similar, but in a way there are, because you're making those life altering decisions. Somebody that's a musician usually is hell bent that they're going to do this and they're going to rule the world and they're going to travel the world, which in a
Yep.
way, when you think about it, that was part of the reason you joined the military, I'm sure, was you get to see the world, you know.
Yes.
So
And
kind
I would have a really interesting challenge would be to have a rock star and a sailor sit down or go out to a bar and see who can drink better, because they're both known for it.
yeah, yeah. My father-in-law, before he passed, I had a strange relationship with my father-in-law. He looked at me as a kid, but he also looked at me as an equal, and he was in his 80s. He would not tell his kids anything. Well, my husband had gotten sick one day, and he was in the hospital, and we're sitting at the end of the bed, and we're talking, and he's telling me how he was so drunk one night. He was living on the base, and he was so drunk one night that him and his wife and another couple, they were coming back home, and that his mind was, he was such on autopilot because he was so roasted that he ended up pulling up to the ship instead of at the house because he was so toasted. And my husband comes through. I'm like, did you know this about your dad? He's like, no. And I ask his siblings, they're like, no. I'm like, well. And my husband's like, well, that's because his wife had been sick at the time. He's like, the only other person he treats the way he talks to is Georgia, his wife. Other than
Mm.
that, I don't know why he can tell you these things, but yeah, he had no problem telling me that. And his kids were mortified. They're like, that's not dad. I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yep.
So,
A quick story I would share with my grandfather was that he was stationed in the South Pacific during World War II. He was a draftsman, a mechanic, and obviously they needed repairs to the ships. His unit down there had a guinea pig,
mm-hmm.
and it just, it was on the island, it was native to the island, and so they just took to it, adopted it, and fed it beer.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh yes. So they had those open-ended Jeeps, like it's famous if you think of the GI. They're in those open-ended
Yeah.
Jeeps with all the people in the back. They said there were, this thing had a couple of beers that they thought it was drunk, and they were going up a hill in one of those Jeeps, and the guinea pig just rolled.
Oh no. Well, I have seen drunk squirrels or squirrels get drunk off of fermented apples. So,
Yep.
wow. So, as
And
we're,
I hope you see what I did there. I told a story about other sailors and not myself.
Yeah, I know. And
Self-preservation.
I was gonna say, so, well, I think that goes back to the fun things at a young age.
Yes. Should stay there.
My grandmother, which, once again, we go back to being nice, and you think your grandmother's really nice. My grandmother was proceeding to tell me, and she was in her 80s, almost 90 actually. She's proceeding to tell my husband how before she used to go out to the bar, she would drink some castor oil so she could drink the men under the table. And I'm just sitting there going, this isn't the grandmother I know, but yeah.
Yes.
So drinking is a thing. I mean, it's a problem. It can be a problem. I'm not saying I've seen people have problems with it.
Yes.
And you alluded that you had some issues when we first started talking, to set this up. So let me ask you this: what led to that? Do you think? Was it just having a good time that got carried away?
Part of it, is a lack of self-control on my own part. Part of it is a good time that just got carried away. Part of it, I think, did also stem with that loss of identity, or not finding my own path for a while. And then once you sort of get comfortable in the bottle, it becomes your crutch.
Yeah.
Honestly, you don't you can get told until you're blue in the face that it's a problem, it's a problem. And when you're in the throes of alcoholism, you can find any excuse to get what you want. You can deny that it has effect on other people. I surely did, until it happened in front of my eyes that my kids had to see too much that I didn't ever want them to see. And so I literally had a point where, I got to that point where, okay, you cannot deny that this has an effect on your children. Or you get to a point where you see all it spills into. You get to a point where you're hiding it. You get to a point where you know what's causing all the fights in your life. And like I was starting to say, was people can tell you it's a problem until they're blue in the face, but until you want to actually find the change for yourself, nothing's really going to actually get anywhere. But I guess my simple message is there's a lot of beauty and a lot of ease on the other side too. It's a much simpler life, not waking up with a hangover or hiding money so you can hide the alcohol, and you think you're hiding it, but you're really not hiding it as well.
My thank you for sharing that, by the way. I know that's hard. My dad, I always consider him a functioning alcoholic, because before my parents split, and in your story actually gives me a little clarity into him, because my dad went from he would have a beer occasionally to being the party man after my parents split. And he was 27, so I have to give him some credit, because he was 27 and a young man when he married. So he didn't have that ruckus partying. Well, my dad took it to extremes. And my dad would pick me up, we'd go to his house, he would have a party, and then he would drive an hour and a half to bring me back home. He wasn't sober. He was a fireman, and he saved people in fires, and so there's that trauma too of watching somebody die that you can't save. There's also, so there's a lot of trauma there, and I get that. But he would function. He was an auto mechanic, very top of his game.
Yes.
And then as soon as 5 o'clock, his garage was actually known as Don's Garage and Social Club. And it's New Orleans, so yeah. But I mean, as a kid, as a 10 or 11-year-old, when you're in that point, when you're in that bit of your life, and your dad was taking you to see Star Wars by yourself, or going out to dinner, or doing whatever, and then all of a sudden you're now being thrust into going into bars at a young age. And he wasn't the only one. My grandfather did too. But going into bars and watching him get drunk. And he wasn't a bad drunk. He was a happy drunk. But still, I mean, I think for me, it gave me an aversion to alcohol. My mom's dad was the one that was the drinker on that side. And it's like, not that I've never had a drink. There are certain drinks I like, but I didn't like the smell or the taste because I had been around it so much as a kid.
Yes.
But for my dad, he can get up, go to work, no problem. He can quit for a few days. He can quit for a month, and no problem. Yes. When my stepmother died in his arms. He drank a case of beer a day, and was proceeding into this downward spiral. And then he quit cold turkey.
Yes.
So it's a little different situation. He had his own business, so he wasn't hiding anything. In fact, his friends embraced it. And now that he's had a stroke and a heart attack and he can't hear, he doesn't really have anybody around him. So all the people that were hanging out with Good Time Donnie are gone.
Yep.
So I'm glad you appreciate the fact that your family is important, because sometimes when you're so busy caught in that party, you don't see your family.
And that's what I wanted to follow up and emphasize, was that you don't get to cherish the family until I didn't get to cherish the family until they got taken from me. I unfortunately had to get to a point where I've been separated. As I said, I've put my kids' things through I'd never wanted them to have in their lifetime. And for me personally, I guess all I want to talk about is my own experience. Was if you let alcohol take everything you have, Um, I guess that's probably the biggest thing is you can progressively see it get worse and worse. You can lose more and more. You can, uh, there's always, well, I won't drink until 5 o'clock. I won't drink liquor. I'll only drink on the weekends. And then, well, Thursday's pretty much close and Friday's an easy work day. So I can drink Thursday night. And then, well, Thursday was fun and I worked great on Thursday. It just progressively just consumes you.
And nobody sees that, except nobody sees you progressing, because, or they do and they just don't say anything.
No, there were plenty of people. I had a sister come from Pennsylvania to Virginia to try and say you need help. She's really been a big help. I've had people. I went to a like a week-long detox just to clear your body, put your body back to reset. That did nothing. I went to a 30-day inpatient facility, and ultimately you realize that if you're not doing it for yourself, it's not going to work. I was doing all that to keep people off my back for long enough, get the heat off of myself so I could
Go back.
settle things down and get back to drinking.
Yeah.
Ultimately for me, like what really got to the point was someone asked me, like, are you willing to do anything to stay sober or like to kick this alcohol problem? And I said, no, I'm not. Like, I didn't really want to kick it bad enough that I didn't want to not drink for the rest of my life. And then we kept talking. And finally I said, well, I don't want to be the alcoholic drunken father. Like, I don't want my kids to resent me or to have that experience for the whole lifetime of, yeah, my dad was a drunk, or I wish we could have done this, or I don't, luckily they're still young enough that unfortunately it has affected them, but hopefully I still have time in front of me.
You do. I mean, like I said, my dad started when I was 9. And it wasn't bad at first, but as I got older, it did. I mean, I brought my stepkids over, and okay. So my mom had died, and I brought my stepkids, and I went down to New Orleans to drop my grandmother off. And my dad had gone to a Christmas party the night before with his girlfriend at the time, and we were supposed to leave. The girls and I were supposed to head back home. So the girls wake up, and I'm like, I'm still tired. You can go out and watch TV in the living room. Okay. They come back a few minutes later, and they're like, Mom. I'm like, what? Something's wrong. I'm like, what? Something's wrong with your dad. Okay. Now, mind you, they are 5 and 7. So I'm like, you stay here. I'll be right back. I walk out to find my dad stark naked on the couch. I'm mortified because it's my father. What do you do? And granted, I'm a grown, I'm in my I think I'm 23, 24, and it's like, what do? You don't want to see this. I mean, so I go back into the bedroom, and I'm like, you girls just stay here. We're gonna get dressed. We'll all be good. So my dad wakes up, and he gets dressed. He's like, oh, you're up. Let's go have some breakfast. He's drunk. He's still drunk. My youngest daughter thinks it's a hoot. She thinks it's fine. My oldest daughter is mortified of him. She is just mortified. I can tell that she's just like, I have pictures of them together during this, and Jessica's all okay, and Michelle's just kind of like, you can see her face. So it's like, I think, if you're realizing and you're acknowledging this, that's a good thing. My dad never did. My dad just still continued on. So I think you can create the memories you want if you can be present for your kids. And that's with anybody. I mean, even if you take this back from the alcohol, if you're not on your phone all the time and you're actually present for your kids, yep, it's an important thing. I mean, I know for me personally, when I transferred schools and I was having a hard day and I came home and I'm like, Mom, I need you. I need to talk. I'm crying. I mean, I'm standing there in front of her in tears. And she looks at me and she goes, I got my own problems, and closes the door. And you're like, okay. So,
Yep.
So if you can be present and you realize what you have, the issue you have, I think you can work around it. I mean, you're willing to embrace that. So, do you see a therapist?
I had for about 2.5 years, and it was really helpful to get through um, a lot of different issues and understand a lot of things that played into a lot of the drinking as well.
I think that's one thing, and I mean, I'm a big proponent for therapy. Um, I think that's one thing that people don't look at, why we end up with the addictions, whether it be weight, food, weight, drinking, whatever, is because sometimes there's something back in our past, in the trauma that we never dealt with, that we look for that escape, and that escape builds and grows. And what we think we're doing for fun, you know, actually has a detriment to us.
Yes. And particularly with alcohol, in my case only, I mean, I put on nearly almost 100 pounds. I that was the other thing too. I got out of the Navy. I stopped exercising. When I lost that identity, I stopped sort of caring physically for myself. Um, and so, yeah, the bottle got more comfortable and more comfortable. I got lazier and lazier. And
But the thing is, you can't. I would say this to you, because I know this has been a hard interview too. Because I hope, I hope I didn't pull the band-aid off too bad. But the thing is, you ought to applaud yourself for where you are now.
yeah, it's the last couple of years have been fruitful and been a lot of changes. Um, and it's exciting to see what's next too.
And let's talk about your podcast for a little bit. How many episodes have you done?
One, we are
Hey,
actually pre-launch.
that's okay. I was flying by the seat of my pants here when I started, and I I had the radio background, and I had friends tell me, you need to do this, and I wanted to do it when my husband was still with us, and he just never really did it. And then I was a guest on somebody's podcast, and that kind of motivated me.
Yeah,
And fortunately, I know people that have the right equipment. They were like, "Here, you can borrow it." I'm like, "Okay." So
perfect.
I hit the ground running, and off I went. And the very first episode I did, I recorded about something at my own better to moment, because I figured, if I'm putting you guys out there to dig emotionally deep, then I better do it to myself, because it's only fair.
Yeah,
Um, so
absolutely.
what? So even though this is your pre-launch, what are your plans for it? Maybe that's the better way to ask then.
Absolutely. The show comes out May 28th, so the Friday before Memorial Day.
Mhm.
Um, the whole purpose is sort of building on that loss of identity, or three big things is we're going to talk about what you did in the military, what lessons did you take from the military, and ultimately where did that, like, what the pivot was. What did you um, build from the life? What kind of life do you have now? How are you impacting your community? Mostly to always cast a positive light on what veterans can do. Um, I'm always very happy that the poor receptions that veterans got 50 years ago seems to mostly have gone away. I think it's much more support for veterans now, but I think it's also sometimes an untold story of what they do next. Like, that's sort of, well, I was in the Navy, but then I was also a business owner, or um, I was a stockbroker, or I was XYZ, um, or I overcame, hopefully today, alcoholism. Um, so I hope it casts that good light. And for me, it's also the exploration of, what did you do, or what could I do next? So um, it'll be part just my own stories. It'll be people I knew when I was in the Navy. So some of it will be a trip down memory lane for me, but also veterans I met along the way, and veterans that the show introduced to me, that just hearing different stories. And it'll be a lot of fun. I'm trying to decide now if I've seen a lot of companies run by veterans that either go the nonprofit route or go the for-profit route, but ultimately have a cause associated to them. So I'm trying to figure out, I don't really have the details worked out, but ultimately, what's that look like for how can I build a business based on supporting veterans or giving back in some way? I just don't have those details yet.
Well, and that's okay. I mean, sometimes things have to grow organically. I mean, you can sit here and say, okay, in 5 years, I'm going to be here. Yeah, okay, well, guess what? You know, if you would have told me when I look back at myself last year at this time, I am not that same person, you know?
Yep.
And I was a married woman, and now I'm not. And I went through watching him die, and I had to make hard choices, just like you had to make a hard choice about your alcoholism. I had to make a hard choice in August of, well, do I eat my grief? Because food is my friend. Do I eat my grief or do I get healthy? Do I work on getting healthy? And
Yep.
so I ultimately decided I need to get healthy, because he wouldn't want me offing myself because I have overeaten and gained so much weight, I'd kill my heart. So I decided to get healthy. I still have a long way to go. But if you would have told me a year ago that I would have done this, I would have been like, nah, I'm happy being an author. I'm not going to do a podcast. I had friends up my derriere trying to get me to do a podcast for 3 years. And I'm like, no, no, no. So, you know, don't sit there and put so much pressure on you. Embrace who you are now
Yep.
and accept every moment you have. I mean, that's the key thing here, I think, you know?
Yeah. And well, thinking about that, one of the funny memes I saw on Facebook, I think, was everyone's prediction for what their life would be like 5 years from now. Well, in 2015, everyone's prediction for what their life would be like in 5 years was wrong.
Yeah.
COVID came through, and what the heck happened to everyone's world?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that
But
was,
like you said, 5 years is who knows?
well, I mean, I'm coming up on a year that he's gone, and it's like, where did the time go? I don't understand where it went because it seems like it was just yesterday, but no, it'll be a year in June, and it's like, how did it just go so quickly?
Yes. The
So
one the one thing I've learned from or embraced recently though is that, um, and part of me wonders how it's taken 38 years to learn this, but um, I'm finally embracing. The time is going to pass anyway.
hmm
Do you want to waste it watching TV all day, or do you want to go do something?
yeah,
You know, and those days string together. Do you want to have a week then of watching TV, or do you want to, have worked on your health, have worked on, your podcast that you're starting? Do you want to do X, Y, Z? Time's
right.
not stopping, so
Well, and I think once you get your podcast started, you're going to see that there's going to be more people coming to you, and uh, it'll get crazy. It will get crazy. Trust me, it will get crazy, and you're like, okay. Especially, are you doing everything on your own?
I am.
Yeah.
And that's also the fun part of it too, is that you got to figure out how do you
hmm
get a podcast on there. And I had the first episode recorded. It was all ready to go, and I was like, let's upload it. And it said, well, there's going to be some restrictions based on how you're doing it. And I said, well, I can't do that because it's not going everywhere I need it to be. So I was like, well, I got to start again. Um,
First podcast I did, I had sound issues. You
yep.
could hear the other person just fine. You couldn't hear me really at all. So yeah, it's all trial and error. And I mean, the format of mine has changed as far as backdrop and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll do it until you get it perfect.
Yeah,
Um, so I guess let's go back to the better two moment since we've had a couple though. So was it better to have joined the military ultimately?
absolutely. Um, I would say what got me to decide was it was always something I wanted to do, and it was checking that box of my service to the country commitment.
hmm
So that altruistic box got checked, but ultimately now it's the memories and the people. Um, the first ship I was on was 7 people in total, and that small division was so close knit. We um, became so close, and so we had nicknames for everyone. Um, I earned a nickname that I wish I'd never told anyone about, but being young and dumb, I went down to my division and I told them all exactly what happens. And I immediately got a nickname that they will all laugh about if they hear this, and they know exactly what that nickname is. And I'm not going to share it because I still regret that
Such a tease.
yeah, it's not a regret, but there's a ceremony the Navy has when they cross the equator. It's called the Shellback ceremony, and it's been going on obviously longer than I remember. My grandfather's a shellback, so he crossed the equator during World War II. So it's been a Navy tradition, um, and it's sort of because you're in the middle of the ocean. It's sort of like a celebration day. You sort of do what you need to do to keep the ship safe, but otherwise it's a party, and
Yeah.
that everyone who's crossed the equator already has the responsibility of cleansing everyone who hasn't.
Uh-huh.
And so they have to literally bathe you of all your unworthiness to be a sailor. And they do that through hot fudge in your hair. Um,
Oh.
you have to go bobbing for apples, which is actually onions. And you don't know that
Ooh.
until you take that big bite.
Oh.
But the best memory, well,
One of the best.
a memory, I don't know if best is the word I want to use, but a memory I have from the first ship, and one of the most important people from my time in the Navy is your chief. It's always your chief. And the Navy particularly has something unique about it in that they, when you get to the rank of E7, so for the military, you have E1 to E10, the enlisted ranks, and O1 to O10, the officer ranks. And that's, across all the branches, very not surprising with the military. They keep it very simple. Um, so when you get to E7 in the Navy, it's a very big deal. You become, in the civilian world, upper management, but it's a big transition in that you're acknowledged as like a senior enlisted leader.
Mm-hmm.
And as the young officer, you learn to rely on the chiefs because they've been there for 15 years. They know how to get things done. And it's also, it's truly how to get things done because your chief goes to talk to the chief that's up in combat systems and things get done very quickly if they need to.
Yeah.
Sometimes at 3 a.m, but that's also a fun memory from the Navy. But the whole story and my best memory from the Navy was the last event that you cross the equator with is you crawl up to the royal baby. Your last moment of unworthiness is you crawl up on your hands and knees and you have to eat the cherry out of the belly of the royal baby. And so they pick the non-athletic person who's already crossed the equator, and it happened to be my chief.
Oh boy.
So you're crawling on hands and knees up to this non-athletic person with a big old hairy belly,
Oh.
and you take a cherry out in your mouth out of his belly, and you're like, okay,
Out of his
I'm a
belly
shellback.
button? Out of his
Yeah,
belly? Oh boy. Wow. Wow.
but that's probably a story I'll be able to tell even if I have dementia, and it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. So
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure it's quite memorable. I'm sure it's quite memorable. I should say I used to be amazed as a kid, because my grandmother used to actually work on the Navy base in New Orleans. She worked at the Navy Exchange, and I was
yes,
always amazed because as a civilian you don't know these things, but if we got there at 5 o'clock and they were taking the flag,
yes,
everything just stops. And as a kid, the first couple of times, you're just like, okay, because you're driving
what's
down the road, and
happening?
all of a sudden, everything stops. People stop walking, everything,
Traffic stops, yes,
and you're just like, what in the world's going on? But yeah, I remember being on the base for about a year and a half, 2 years, and it was just kind of like, wow, okay. It was definitely, and yeah, because you're a civilian, you could go to the Navy Exchange, but you couldn't go to the PX. She could
yes,
shop at the Navy Exchange, but could not shop at the PX.
yep.
It was very bizarre, but as a kid, you don't know these things.
Yes.
Um, so where can they find your podcast? Is going to be on YouTube and Instagram? Is that correct?
Yes, we're building the YouTube channel, obviously, since we're still just launching. But I think YouTube's going to be great in that it'll show a lot more detail of more behind the scenes. It'll of course out of the shows, but more behind the scenes and what also, as I said, I don't know what the business or the nonprofit's going to be, so that'll probably be more exploration there. But it's all Veterans in the Wild, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
Will you be doing Q&As with your guest, or just gonna shoot it and then upload it?
It'll be some Q&A to get through the background of, we need to know some basic facts of the background of the military.
Oh
And
no,
then,
let me rephrase. Will it be
sorry,
live Q&As?
we might get there. Right now, it's probably just going to be shoot it and go. It's probably not prepared for that yet.
No, I understand. It's something you have to find your legs at interviewing somebody and getting in the flow,
Yeah.
and all that other thing. So I get it totally. I completely understand. And I want to thank you for your honesty, your service. I know it was not always easy, and I hope I didn't push too far. So I thank you for joining me today, and I really do appreciate it. And I wish you the best, Adam.
Thank you. It's been a blast, and it really was fun to do it. I'm glad to see where this went.
Well, thank you again, and have a good day.
Yep, all my best. Thank you.